The myth of Perseus and the Gorgons as told by Ovid. Compared to Apollodorus, Ovid's telling is ripe with emotional language and much more dramatic than the factual accounts given by Apollodorus. The story starts not with Perseus' birth, like the previous one, but instead in the middle of the myth. Perseus has just gotten Medusa's head and is flying back to Argos. Ovid gives much more detail about Perseus's journey and describes the power of the Gorgon's head much more acutely. For example, when flying over the desert in Libya, blood from Medusa's head drips onto the sand, and from the blood, snakes form, and these snakes still inhabit the sands to this day. Ovid also introduces the power to turn men to stone, not at the wedding party, but with the god Atlas. Atlas, being so large, turned into a mountain after denying Perseus a place to rest, and Perseus showing him Medusa's head in retaliation. Ovid is really stressing the power of the Gorgon's head here. In death, Medusa is powerful enough to turn even gods to stone. After Atlas, Perseus continues traveling and happens upon Andromeda, about to be killed by a sea monster. Perseus instantly falls in love, although in this version, Ovid's lyrical way of writing puts a lot more romance into this than with Apollodorus, whose factual nature made this scene a lot less romantic. Of course, Perseus saves Andromeda, and her father agrees to let them marry. And it is here at the wedding party that we get a first-hand account from Perseus of how he got the Gorgon's head. It was Cepheus, his father-in-law, who asked, and Perseus's reply came right after. Again, this is where Ovid differs, because instead of just keeping the narration in a third-person point of view, we get dialogue and accounts from Perseus himself. Another point that Ovid explains much more deeply is Athena, or Minerva's, role in Medusa's appearance. Medusa used to be the most beautiful creature around, and was raped by Neptune at Minerva's shrine. As punishment, or salvation according to other interpretations of the myth, Minerva's transformed Medusa's beautiful hair into locks of snakes. After Perseus finishes telling his story to his father-in-law, Ovid actually moves into Book 5 of Metamorphoses, starting off with Perseus' fight at the palace of Cepheus. It is interesting that Ovid chooses to separate these events not just by chapters but by entire books. It is here that Perseus and the wedding guests are attacked by Phineus, Andromeda's former betrothed. Ovid goes through the battle, naming the men fighting and how they might have been wounded or killed, and what side they were fighting on. Finally, after a few pages, it came down to just Perseus against Phineus and his men. Perseus, cornered, knew he could do only one thing to save his life. He pulled out the Gorgon's head and thrust her eyes out upon the mass of people, because, of course, you would have been carrying a head with you when you were getting married, but besides the point. Seeing how all his men have become statues in stone, Phineus knew that he had lost. He began to beg for his life. Ovid's lyrical prose even had me hoping that Perseus would show mercy, but alas, that was not to be so. Perseus answers Phineus's pleas right away, declaring that a statue he will be for the rest of his life. After this, Ovid goes one last short paragraph explaining quickly how Perseus took revenge against his grandfather in Argos, and then going back to Seriphus, how he killed Polydectes. I found it really interesting that this last part of the story, which some might say might be the most important because this is his return to give the elixir for going through the hero's journey. But he again only does one short paragraph right at the end of the story, and then Ovid jumps into another chapter, into a different story entirely about Minerva. Overall, Ovid's telling of Perseus and the Gorgons was full of emotion, fueled by plot, and read more as a fantasy short story than that of an historical explanation, as is the case with Apollodorus. Ovid also uses intricate storytelling, starting in the middle and explaining the beginning through narration of another character, which is very interesting for the time that this was written. Thank you for watching and listening, and I have the citation also in the description of the video. Thank you.